Hi guys, I hope you're doing okay today. I wanted to make a video titled Where Do I Start? And the topics for these videos come from conversations that I have with people, and I try to cover as many topics relating to these drugs that I can. And I haven't mentioned this in a long time, but I do want to say that I'm doing part-time coaching again 3 days a week. If you want to chat, it's best for me to get your whole background information, all your whole story before I like to comment on questions, because I think it's more fair to you to have my full attention in a chat, because I'm very busy when I'm trying to just answer emails, and I think it gives me a lot better of an idea of where you're coming from if I can have a conversation and know the whole story first. So I'll leave the link to my booking calendar in the description and move on with this topic. So the basis for this, or what I want to get into, is there's a lot of people that I talk to who might be recently off these drugs, maybe a little bit further along, maybe in their, heading towards 1 year or in their second year or even further than that. And they're still kind of at that fork in the road where they're like, should I go back on or should I stay off? And I want to break this down really simplistically, because that's my approach and how I would break it down for someone in a conversation. Because I think there's just so much information, it's so overwhelming, and so many people will say to me, half the people are telling me to do this, half the people are telling me to do this. I can't even think straight anymore. I'm so confused. I feel so hopeless. I don't know what to do. I can't make a decision to save my life. And so here's the way that I approach that. So if you're at that fork in the road where you're like, I don't know if I should go back on or I should stay off. I obviously love everybody to be off these drugs, but I understand that that is not the way to recovery for everybody, and I respect that. And the first thing that I say is that you have to make a decision either way, because it's mostly the on and off, up and down, back and forth that causes more problems than just one or the other. It's not that simple, but that is generally a better way to do things, is to really commit one way or the other. Also, I tell people to really unplug when they're trying to make this decision, because like I've said in many other videos, the overwhelming amount of information ends up making people more confused, and because this process is confusing. And so if you kind of break it down, it can be helpful. So unplug, try to listen to your intuition. If you have no idea what your intuition is saying, then unplugging is still the first step. And then coming to that decision, because I've found that most people will eventually be like, I'm done with this, I'm going back on, I don't care, I have to do something. And other people will get to that point, which is what happened to me, where I'm like, I wouldn't take another psychiatric drug for $1 million. So usually people will get to that point one way or the other, and that's actually a good thing, because then you can set your expectations around that decision and be more confident in that decision, which actually can make a difference in the outcome. So I've never been someone that does drugs. I mean, I've smoked weed, but I've never done psychedelics or anything like that. But I know people who have, and both real life and online, and pretty much they all say that your expectation, your mind frame, and the people you're around make a difference in your trip experience. So the first time I smoked weed, I was like 29. So I was someone who started late, and my best friend at the time, she had been my friend for about 8 years at that point. She was a chronic smoker, and she was like, she'd always kind of wanted me to try, but she was never the type to like pressure me. And finally I was like, okay. And she really like kind of pumped me up, and she said, just relax into it, and I felt safe with her. And I mean, this isn't any kind of crazy drug, but I was a little bit scared and apprehensive. My baby's dad used to do mushrooms sometimes, and he said the same thing to me. Like, I'd never done them, but he's like, I don't know how well you would do, because I am such an anxiety prone person, and I don't know if I could relax into the experience. And he said that's a really important part of the outcome. And I think that applies to these drugs as well, because even if you look into the effectiveness of antidepressants, it says something like 80% could be attributed to the placebo effect. What you expect the outcome to be will have a big influence on the experience that you have. The nocebo effect is also very real. So if you expect a negative outcome, if you're terrified around the experience and the outcome, that will affect how the drugs affect you. And I totally believe that. And so that's important to consider. So that's why unplugging, getting yourself off the groups and trying to listen to everybody else's experiences and trying to stay in your own can be very helpful. And then getting to a point where you're confident in your decision. And I've talked about this in other videos where the people around you also have influence on this, because they're the ones that live with you. They're the ones going to be, you know, supporting you through what decision you make. So that also plays a role, because you have to feel safe, especially if you've been quite traumatized by these drugs, which most people in this experience have been, but they feel like they need to go back on, they need to try something. So your sense of safety will also make a difference in the experience that you have. Not all the way, obviously there's still biological and physiological things going on. I would never negate that. But again, when you look at it like similar to other drugs, your expectation plays a role. And I've shared this as well too. I had repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation when I was in the throes of acute, or my reinstatement. And then one day I go in and, you know, they're doing the magnetic pulsations and they say like, okay, well, typically every day or every other day we crank up the strength. And so I go in the next day and they say, okay, we're gonna amp up the volume of this, or the strength of this, the intensity. And because they had forewarned me, they say, you might feel pain, you might feel this. And I couldn't handle it. I was like, you gotta stop. And they shut it off. The next day I go in and they didn't tell me anything beforehand. They had actually cranked up the volume to that same intensity as the day before without warning, and I felt absolutely nothing. So to say that your expectation or your mind has no bearing on any of this, I think is naive, for lack of a better word. So those are the important things. Okay, you have to make a decision, stick to it one way or the other, and you have to have a certain expectation around it as much as you can. And to help do that, you need to unplug. So that's what I would say to someone who's trying to make this decision. So say you decide to go back on. The reason why the forums, which I agree here, obviously like the lower doses is a better place to start, because it would dilute a reaction level. So obviously and theoretically, if you take 2 milligrams and you were to react to it, it would be a much lesser reaction than if you were to take 20 milligrams. So that's why you start low. I also think it's really important, sorry, it suddenly got really windy, to put parameters around, like put some type of limits, because I find too, if you just kind of throw people into the abyss, so to speak, and say, okay, go back on, start low, and that's it. I find it more helpful to try to make a more specific plan. So let's give it 4 weeks. That maybe that's not long enough, or maybe 6 weeks, but give a timeline. We're gonna try this milligram dose for this long, see what happens. If you have a reaction, you could decide to continue to try it for a few days, and your reaction hypothetically or theoretically shouldn't be extreme if it's at a low dose, but if it causes you great discomfort, you can pull away and stop, but it shouldn't be super bad if you're at a low dose. I had a reaction that was very noticeable at a low dose, but I also was terrified at that point, but I felt like I had no choice. And I didn't have any of this knowledge at that point. Anyway, so you'd start at a low dose, give it a timeline. And then if you don't really notice anything good or bad, then I would say, okay, then let's try to go up to the next one. Maybe it's 3 milligrams, 4 milligrams. And this, people might disagree with this and say, well, you need to give it 12 weeks or you need to give it 6 months. And you could have that as a timeline as well. But the person's comfort level and how long they're willing to do this, you also have to discuss with that person. So say it's 8 weeks, that's fine, or 12 weeks. And if they feel nothing, then you'd go up to the next dose. And I think it's important to kind of forewarn or just discuss with people that this isn't a magic bullet fix, because some people will go into reinstatement like this is going to fix everything. And it might, but it might take quite a while before you see the results that you want. And so setting up that expectation, I think, is important as well. And so, then I think not only having that timeline in place, but also defining stability, because I think too, this word gets thrown around so much in this community, and I've never really seen it well defined. And that might be because it's individual to a person. And so if you say, what does stability look like, or how are we going to define it for you? Again, this is putting something concrete in place, which really helps people continue forward rather than just these random vague things that we just hope works and let's just give it a shot in hell. I feel like systematic approaches are better no matter which way you go. Okay, so then it's like, okay, well, let's define stability. Does it mean it's how you felt before when you were successful on the drug? Was it how you felt pre-drug? Is it feeling 50% normal, 80% normal? Is it just breaking this one symptom, dialing it down 100%, 50%? What does it look like? I think that's really important because people will be like, I don't know if I'm stable. Some people have a better idea of what that looks like than others, but I think it's important because psychiatry is so unscientific and so not measurable and not clearly defined. I think if we can put in some type of parameters, it's helpful for people. That's what I've seen. So that's how you make it, I guess, systematic and definite instead of vague. If you go the other route, say you're like, I would never take another psych drug ever, then I think that obviously like time is on your side, and I do see people getting pretty far in their recovery from time alone. But I'm also, the longer I'm in this, studying this, talking to people, I do think that there are things that you can do to help it along. I just don't agree with laying back and just waiting for this waiting for healing to occur before doing anything. And I'm not saying that to exaggerate. I see people where they're unwilling or not doing anything until this elusive healing occurs. And I'm not sure, I've said this in other videos, I'm not sure what that even means. Waiting for the receptors to heal, how do you know that they've healed? Does that mean you're normal? Does that mean you never have waves again? I mean, you could be waiting a long time. I prefer to look at it more as in acute, and I've defined this many times before. When you're not having a break in symptoms, nothing you do makes a dent in symptoms at all. You get no breaks, you get no reprieve, you get no even lessening of symptoms. If you're in acute akathisia, acute withdrawal, like that's very different. I'm not talking about that here. But once you get further out and you've decided you're not going back on ever again, and you're like, is there anything that I can do? I think it's important to explore things. And I've talked about this in many other videos, but that is how I would break it down in conversation with someone. And a lot of this too, what I'm talking about lately is based on this conversation I've had with a lady, hi, you know who you are if you're watching this, who's just made is making an incredible recovery. Someone very, very severely impacted by these drugs more than once, very severe symptoms, someone that I've known, I've talked to, you know, on video chat multiple times, and now in conversation over the phone. And she kind of got to a point where she was like, there's got to be something I can do. And I just don't want to wait around for healing, because she was actually becoming more fearful over time. And she sent me a video that I thought was very interesting, and I want to bring up in this conversation here. It was about someone who had recovered from long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was a very detailed video, and it was incredible to me how eerily similar her symptoms, her trajectory, everything was to people in withdrawal. And that's why I take more of an approach, maybe more of a holistic approach, or I don't know how you'd word it, that this is much more than just healing the receptors. It's a severely dysregulated nervous system. And I have a bucket theory. I've talked about that before. And to me, the dynamic nature of the nervous system more explains the up and down of this, rather than just a receptor thing. I get that the receptors are part of the brain, part of the nervous system, but I like to look at the nervous system as a whole. And to me, like the hot and cold, the temperature dysregulation, the up and down of blood pressure, the up and down of pulse, the windows and waves, the up and down is much more indicative of severe nervous system dysregulation, more so than a receptor problem. That's the way that I see it. And in all of these other conditions that are so similar to protracted withdrawal, they say the same thing. And how can that all be possible when some of the people in those conditions have never taken a psych drug? Like, they're talking about and describing the inability to sit still, the inability to sit down, internal vibrations, tinnitus, all like pain, all of the things like severe sensitivities. They can't, you know, eat food. They can't be around chemicals. They can't, they have to be in dark rooms. They have to wear headphones. They, you know, noise is too much, sound, light, being around people, everything. And they're so reactive to everything. How can that be possible in people that have never taken psych drugs, but it's so similar and mimics it so well? And I've brought this up in videos before, and I've kind of questioned it and talked through it in the videos, but now that I'm seeing more and more evidence of this being a nervous system problem more than just a receptor problem, it just makes more sense to me, that whole theory. And the fact that people can bring themselves out of all of these conditions when maybe they weren't making much progress before, using things like neural retraining, doing things that are known to bring the nervous system more into balance. That's the way that I prefer to view it. And that it's, and two, they talked about in this video, and I've had conversations with people as well who get very wrapped up in, what does this mean? Does this symptom mean I have TD? Does this symptom, the way I'm describing it, does this mean I have akathisia? Does this mean I have mental akathisia? And my response has always been, those labels actually don't matter. They're pretty arbitrary. They matter in the sense that it has more meaning to you if someone says, I have akathisia, because that is like the worst reaction you can have to a drug. And not like people are wanting that, but it means a lot to them if someone says you have akathisia, because then they're like, oh my, you know, that there's no treatment for that, and that can be permanent, and it, you know, it's the most severe thing. And so people get really stuck on that. Or they'll be like, does this mean I have anhedonia? And I'll sometimes fire it back and say, if it did mean, or if it was anhedonia definitively, what does that mean to you? And they'll say, that means that it's permanent. Like, it means that it's this permanent numbing of emotions, and that doesn't come back for people. And I always say, like, it doesn't really matter how it presents. It's all this overarching nervous system dysregulation problem. And that's what these videos were talking about. And to me, again, that makes more sense. And it also can help dial the fear down, because nervous system dysregulation sounds less threatening than akathisia. And I'm in no way trying to downplay people's experiences. Acute akathisia is real. It's a real reaction, and it's not mind over matter. This isn't mind over matter either. But that there's not a lot you can do but wait that out. But once you get further out and the symptoms just go on and on and on, I think you should start exploring other things. And I get into conversations with people about this all the time as well. And I've seen people make full recoveries doing these things. It's not a panacea. It's not the same straight across the board, but I think it's important to look into those things and how do we get the nervous system to regulate again? Because again, I just don't see how, if this is brain damage or brain injury, that doesn't take vacations. Whereas literally when people go on vacations, their symptoms will disappear. That is not consistent with permanent damage. Like, just on a logical level, not even getting into the science, the physiology, it just, why is that? And I hear that from a lot of people. And that has been something that, maybe not the holiday thing, because I didn't really travel before, but like, there were certain situations where it would bring my symptoms down, and then other ones that would dial it back up again. And that is more consistent. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm rambling too much. I try to make it basic, and I try to like boil it down simply. And I just don't understand how so many of these conditions are so similar, regardless of whether someone took psychiatric drugs. Even the tinnitus course I took, talking about where his focus is mitochondrial dysfunction and how it presents in people, he said the cause, or the like how what started it, doesn't matter. The resolution is the same for everyone. And in his view, it's repairing the mitochondria. So if we carry that over into this, the cause of it is, of all of these symptoms, could be long COVID, it could be drugs, it could be ME/CFS, it could be POTS, it could be, or maybe not POTS, but and the resolution is the same, which is calming down the nervous system. And this is not just about, you know, cognitive, conscious awareness things. This can get really deep into, there's all different levels of this, depending on how deeply you're affected. And I could ramble on for hours. I don't want to get into all of the details of that, but this is where I would start. Hopefully this is making sense. And I just find that that's a more helpful way. And I personally believe that regardless of your situation, there is a way out. There's always something that you can do. And I think some of the danger of these groups and these forums is saying there's nothing you can do. And I talked about that yesterday in my video. You're basically hooped. You know, there's nothing you can take, there's nothing you can do. And I'm starting to believe less and less and less in that as I talk to more and more and more people that are recovering and seeing how they got there. And this isn't about blame, it isn't about gaslighting, it's about understanding the nervous system and how intricate and complex it is. And again, I hate these drugs just as much as the other person, but I think what's going on is severe nervous system dysregulation more so than receptor damage. And that it fits the boxes way more than that other theory does. And it explains more why, you know, you can feel well for a while, then go back into it. And a lot of times it's triggered by like emotional stress or like hormone stuff, and all of this is related to the stress response and immune system and inflammation, and it's all, again, I don't want to make this super complicated, I try to keep it simple, but that's how I break it down for people, because I know that there's so much confusion, so much fear, and we try to dial it back. And I always give the message of there's always a next step that you can take. I don't believe that anybody is completely trapped. I know it can feel that way, but I've seen people in every situation come out of it. So anyway, I hope this isn't too rambly and too long and it makes some coherent sense. Let me know your thoughts on this. And again, I think a systematic approach, no matter what point you're at, if it's considering reinstatement, if it's, you know, you are reinstating, where do we go from here? What are the parameters around it? Or if you decide to stay off, getting through the acute part, and then what can you do next to just move this or shift this even a little bit? And I've seen so many different modalities work for different people, and I'm not really a believer in all of the individual labels, because I think it just makes people more afraid, people who are already in a very high fight or flight response. And yeah, the end point is the same, calming down the system and getting out of that dysregulation. And two, I wanted to comment that it makes more sense, because I've also made videos where I've said I don't really understand why about 75% of the people affected by these drugs or withdrawal go into a hyper excited state, and about 25 more percent, or the rest of the 25% seem to go into like a shut off response. And it makes more sense to, from what I was watching in this video today, I will put a link to it in the description of this video if you want to check it out. It explains more about, you know, why some go up, and or maybe it wasn't that video, sorry, I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but it's just how the nervous system is responding, but it's still dysregulated, and that is the problem. So I'm going to end it there. Let me know your thoughts on this and where you're at in the journey and how you're doing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.